We continue now at the top of Daf 68a Daf and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 68a. On the previous summit, the Mishnah said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there is no concern that if people are harvesting from the new grain, if they're harvesting before the Omer is actually brought, there's no concern that they're going to come to eat from that grain while they're harvesting. And the question of the Gemara was that we find that on Pesach, Rabbi Yehuda actually is concerned. Rabbi Yehuda says that Bedikas Chametz should not be done at a time when one is not allowed to eat Chametz. Let's say he didn't do the Bedika at the proper time. And the reason is that there is a concern that he's going to come to eat from the Chametz. And so the question is, why the distinction? And the Gemara now is in the middle of an answer from Rabba. Rabba says, Mitoch, when it comes to Chadash, when it comes to the new grain, Mitoch shelo hitarta lo ela al yedei kitov, since when we're harvesting, when the individuals were harvesting that grain before the bringing of the Omer, they're not allowed to harvest it in the normal fashion. It has to be al yedei kitov, essentially by hand. So therefore, Zacharhu, therefore the person remembers and he will not come to eat from it. There's a specific reason why the person will not eat. Rashi explains, Mitoch shelo hitarta lo liksor b'magel, since he's not supposed to reap it with a sickle, el al yedei kitov b'yad, rather he plucks it with his hand, v'lo b'magel, not with a sickle, kimo v'kataftem melilos b'yadecha, like the pasuk mentions v'kataftem melilos, you see that the word v'kataft is used b'yadecha, with the hand, tiktsira kodem ha'omer asura, because really harvesting in the normal fashion before the omer is asur, k'dektan v'masnisin v'asur liksor lifnei omer, like it says in the Mishnah, and so therefore since he's doing it by hand, zachar, who he remembers the chadash, who he remembers that it's the new grain, v'lo achil, and he's not going to eat from it. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaye, Abaye said to him, if that's the answer, that the kituf allows him to remember, so teinach ketzira, that works for the moment of harvesting. He'll remember, he's not going to come to eat from it. But techina v'harkada ma'ikol amemer, but what about by the grinding and the sifting, what are you going to say over there? Because again, the whole problem over here was that the flour, the marketplace of Yerushalayim were full of flour. That means it was fully processed. It wasn't only harvested, it was also ground up, it was also sifted, and so therefore during those parts of the process, how is he going to remember? Rashi explains, Techina v'harkada mai shinoi ika, what unique differences in the way it's done, they'll have his zachar v'lo yochel, that he's going to remember v'lo yochel, and he won't eat from it. What's the answer to those parts of the process? And the Gemara continues in answers to that, halo kasha, that's not difficult. Techina berechaya diyada, the techina, that's done with a hand mill, and harkada, the sifting, al gabe nafa, that's done on the back of the sieve. Rashi explains, berechaya diyada derechaya miskalgelis biyad v'lo b'shalmayim. The point is that it's going to be turned, that mill is going to be turned by hand and not through water. And again, when it comes to the nafa, that's done on the back, the harkada, that's done on the back of the nafa. But the Gemara still continues and asks, Beis Hashlachin, what about irrigated fields? So there, Desharya Ktsira, they're actually harvesting or reaping in the normal fashion is actually permitted. And so therefore we're back to the problem. Over there, you're not going to have a way to remember not to eat from it. The Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah later on, Kotzrin Beis Hashlachin Sheba Mokim, with regards to the irrigated fields in the valleys, one is allowed to harvest, Avalo Gochin, but one may not stack the harvested grain. And so again, over there, we're back to the question, Ma'ikol Amemer, what are we going to say in that scenario? There should be a concern again that one might eat from it. And Rashi explains, Kotzrin Beis HaShalachim Sheba Amokim, one is allowed to harvest the irrigated fields in the valleys. Why is that permitted? Dekevin Desadi Yevesha, since it's a dry field, Imashu Lo Lachar Bishula Azal Leibud, if you're going to delay over there the harvesting, it's actually going to end up going Leibud, it's going to be lost. And so therefore, in that situation, we are lenient. Lishnachrina, Rashi says another explanation of this, Ro'osein, those fields are actually inferior quality. Vein Omer Ba Mehen, the Omer doesn't come from them anyhow. V'amrinan B'hai Pirkin, we say in our parak, Mimokum Shata, maybe only from the areas where you bring the Omer, Iata Kotzer, that's where you're not allowed to harvest. Umimokum Shiata, maybe, but if it's a place where you don't bring it from, Ata Kotzer, you are allowed to harvest. Viloshan Za'ikar, Rashi says the second explanation is the better explanation. V'chein Mefursh L'kamon, this is explained later on. Avalo Gochin, but you can't stack the heaps. Lo Yasenu Godish Ad Lachar Omer, that you can't do until after the Omer. And so the Gemara continues with a different answer. Elamar Abaya, rather Abaya says, Chadash, with regards to the new grain, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned is because Badal Minei, people naturally separate from it. But Chametz, with regard to Chametz, Lo Badal Minei, people are not naturally separating. All year you eat Chametz, and so therefore it is more of a problem. Rashi explains, Chadash Badal Minei Sharei Lo Achal Chadash Kol Hashana. The person hasn't eaten Chadash from the new grain the entire year. But Chametz Lo Badal Minei Kol Hashana. Chametz he hasn't separated from the whole year. Sharei Achlo Adahena, because he's eaten it until until now. Hilka chasi lamechle. Therefore, there's more of a concern that he's going to come to eat it. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Rav Yehuda kasha. You think it's a contradiction in Rav Yehuda, but the Rabbanan lo kasha, but it's not a contradiction within the Rabbanan. We're only answering right now the contradiction within Rav Yehuda, but the exact same contradiction applies within the Rabbanan. And Rashi explains, the Rabbanan lo kasha bitmiya, the Rabbanan against the Rabbanan is not difficult, that's a wonderment. The Hacha Amri, because over here they say, the Hacha Amri Rabbanan, here the Rabbanan say, Shelo b'ritzon chachamim osin, that when the flour was in the marketplaces right after the Omer was brought, that was against the will of the Chachamim. The Gazrinan Shamayochel, meaning that the Chachamim, they say there is a Gezerah that the person might come to eat. They are concerned. V'hasam Amri, but over there, when it comes to Chametz on Pesach, they say, Yivadak la'achar hamoed, one could do Bedika after the normal time of Bedika, Dahainu b'socha Pesach, one is allowed to do the Bedika in the middle of Pesach. So it comes out according to the Rabbanan, they are not concerned the person's going to eat the Chametz, but they are concerned by the Chadash. How do we answer that contradiction? And the Gemara continues, Alamar Rava, rather Rava says, Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha kiddush and Rabbi Yehuda, the contradiction within Rabbi Yehuda, that's not difficult, that's the same answer we gave. Again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Chadash one naturally stays away from, there's no concern. Chametz one is not naturally staying away from, and therefore there is a concern. Now, in terms of the Rabbanan, it's the exact reverse. There's no concern by Chametz, but there is a concern when it comes to Chadash. Why is that? The Rabbanan lo kasha, by the contradiction within the Rabbanan, that's not difficult, because with regards to Chametz, the reason why they are not concerned, again, the exact opposite of Rabbi Yehuda, who specifically is concerned by Chametz, but the Rabbanan are not, because hu atzma mechazer alav l'sarfa, because the whole reason why he's pursuing the Chametz is in order to burn it. He's trying to destroy it before Pesach. Meichel achal minei, do you really think that he's going to eat from it? Of course not, and that's why they have no concern when it comes to Chametz on Pesach. And the Gemara continues with another answer. Ravashi says, to Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha, the contradiction within Rabbi Yehuda is not difficult, and the reason for that is kemach koli tanan, because what does it say in the Mishnah? It says that there was flour and there was toasted kernels in the marketplaces, and those aren't generally not eaten anyhow, and that's why it was not a concern according to Rabbi Yehuda. That's why there was no concern when it came to the new grain. Rashi explains, kemach koli tanan dein ruin lachila, they're not things that people eat. Kain kemach shalonu kemach haba mitzvah shenisyav betanor, and the kemach that refers to our flour, and the kali that refers to the oven dried grain. And again, the point is it's not something that's eaten, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda was not concerned. But the Gemara continues, V'had Rav Ashi bedusi, but this answer of Rav Ashi, that Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned because kemach kali tanan, that's like an outside view, that's not correct, because teinach mi kali va'elach, that makes sense from the point in time where it's toasted and onward, but ad kali ma'ikal amemer, but before that point it actually is edible, and therefore what are we going to say over there? Rashi explains that kali ma'ikal amemer kagon b'shas katsira, like at the time of the harvest, the roy lochlo, that at that point in time it actually is fit to be eaten, and therefore this answer does not work. And the Gemara continues and says, V'chiteim, if you're going to say, Hachanami al yedei kituf, that here also al yedei kituf, meaning since it's being plucked by hand, Rabba, like Rabba said above, and so therefore he's going to remember we don't have a concern, he'll eat it at that point in time, but still it's a problem. Beis hashloch in the Sharia Katsira, again in the irrigated fields, where the harvesting is permitted, as we said above, Ma'ikal Meimer, what are we going to say over there? Again, there it should be a concern. El Had Rav Ashi Bedusihi, rather this answer of Rav Ashi, again, it's an outside view, it is not a proper answer. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Mishakara v'omer, from when the Omer was brought, Hutar Chadash miyad, that's when Chadash, the new grain, was permitted immediately. Harachokim, those who were far away, they didn't know exactly when the Omer was brought. Mutar and Mechatzos hayom al halan, so there, it's mutar, the new grain for them, from Chatzos hayom, from midday and onward. By that point already they can assume that the Omer was brought. And the Mishnah continues, Mishachara Beis HaMikdash, from the time that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, so there was no Omer, Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Sheyom Hanaf Kulo As, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that the entire day of the waving, meaning the whole 16th, Chadash should be Aser. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, V'alo min haTorah Aser. What do you mean that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted as if it's a Derabanan in such a situation when there's no Beis HaMikdash? Even Midoraisa was Aser the whole day. Shenemar, as it says in the Pasuk, Ad Etzem Hayom Hazeh, until this very day. And Mipnei Mahar Chokim Mutar Mechatzos Hayom Olahalin. And why is it that those who are far away when the Omer actually was brought, why is it permitted from midday and onward? Mipnei Shein Yod and Shein Bezin Misatzlin Bo, because they knew that Bezin would not be lazy about it. It certainly would be brought by that time. And Rashi explains, Harachokim shenan yodim imadayin karav. Again, that's talking about those far away. They don't know if it was brought yet. Mutar mechatzos hayom. It's mutar for them from midday. Ulahalon kidatani time ulakamon. And the reason will be explained as we go on. Shi hayom hanaf. And then after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he instituted that whole day, Yom Tezayin, that whole day of the 16th of Nisan, Shabo Manifin Es HaOmer, which was the day they would generally wave the Omer, Kulo Asr Lechol Chodesh. That entire day, it's Asr Tid Chodesh. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Latana Demas Nisan. Rabbi Yehuda said, V'chi Rabbi Yochanan Hiskin, was this really an institution? Was it a decree of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? V'halo min HaTorah Asr, Shenemar Etzem. It's really Midorais. It says Etzem Yom Hazeh. Uvizman Shein Beis HaMikdash Kayim Mishtoi Kra. The pasuk is talking when there's no Beis HaMikdash. Kidemuki beGemara, as the Gemara will say. And then the Mishnah said at the end, Mifnei Ma'amru. Why do they say it's from Chatzos for those far away? That's Bein Rabbi Meir or Vein Rabbi Yehuda. That's according to all Tanoim. Whether Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Yehuda, Da'afilu Rabbi Yehuda Moda. Even Rabbi Yehuda agrees. The Vizman Sheyesh Omer, that in a time when the Omer is brought, Omer Mater, the bringing of the Omer is Mater. In other words, when Rabbi Yehuda says the whole 16th is Asr on a Doraisa level, that's when the Omer is not brought. That's when the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. But when there's an Omer, the bringing of the Omer is Matir. That's what makes it permitted. That's what permits the new grain. Tichsiv ad haviyachem, as it says in the pasuk, ad haviyachem. And the Gemara says, Rav Shmuel, Damri Tarvayu, Rav and Shmuel, they both say, Bizman Beis HaMikdash Kayim, at the time that there was a Beis HaMikdash, Omer Mater. So then again, the Omer is what permits the new grain. Bizman She'ein Beis HaMikdash Kayim, but at the time of no Beis HaMikdash, so then Heyer Mizrach Mater. So then, when the sun rises in the east on the 16th, right at the beginning of the 16th, then we say that the new grain is permitted. My time, and what's the reason for this? Trei Kroi Ksiv, because there are two psukim that are written. Ksiv ad haviyachem, it says until you bring the Omer. Uchsiv aretzem hayom hazeh, and it also says aretzem hayom hazeh. So haketzad, how so? Kan bizman shebeis hamikdash kayim. In one case we're talking when there's a Beis Hamikdash, and kan bizman shein Beis Hamikdash kayim. In the other case we're talking when there is no Beis Hamikdash. Rashi explains, Heyer hamizrach means hanetz hachama shel tezayin. It means sunrise of the 16th, avolei lo aser. But according to Rav and Shmuel, the night of the 16th, it would still be prohibited. Ad etzem hayom. What does it mean, ad etzem hayom? It means ad mare hayom, until the light of the day. V'kasavar ad v'lo ad bechlal. It means ad but not including. In other words, ad means until the sunrise, and once sunrise comes, then it's going to be permitted. And it would seem from Rav and Shmuel that Rav and Shmuel essentially agree with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in our Mishnah. Again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says that it was just a decree midrabanan when there was no Beis HaMikdash that the whole 16th of the new grain was usher, but on Doraisa level, on the day of the 16th, it would already be permitted. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish de Amri Tarvayu, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they both say, Afilu bizman shebeis HaMikdash kayim, even when there was a Beis HaMikdash, Heyer Mizrach Mater, was when the sun rose in the east, that's when the new grain was permitted. But the Gemara asks, but isn't it written ad haviyachem? It says until you actually bring the Omer. How can Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish say that the beginning of the day it's already mutter? Don't we actually have to bring the Omer when there's a Beis HaMikdash in order to permit the new grain? And the Gemara says to that, l'mitzvah, that was just a mitzvah lechatchila. It's better to wait until the Omer, but it's not necessary. And the Gemara continues and asks, it says in our Mishnah, Mishakar of Omer Hutter Chodesh Miyad, that when the Omer was brought, that's when the new grain is permitted right away. And so again, it seems from our Mishnah, the Omer has to actually be brought. Again, the Gemara answers, La mitzvah, that's just a mitzvah to wait for the Omer, but it's not absolutely necessary. And the Gemara continues and asks from the coming Mishnah, HaOmer Hayamater b'Medina Shtei Halechem b'Mikdash. It says the Omer permits in the Medina, outside the Beis HaMikdash, and the Shtei Halechem on Shavuos, that's what permits the new grain in the Beis HaMikdash. Again, it seems that the Omer actually has to be brought. And again, the Gemara says, La mitzvah, it's just a mitzvah to wait for the Omer to be brought. And Rashi explains, Mishakar of Omer, again it said in our Mishnah from when the Omer is brought, Kol hanach mishum pircha kamaisi ashas Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. All of these questions are against Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Again, they say that immediately at the beginning of the day the new grain is permitted, and here it seems that it's from the actual bringing of the Omer. Hutter chadash alma ba'omer talia milsa. Again, we see it all depends on the Omer itself. Umeshani lemitzvah. The Gemara answers, that's just a mitzvah. Mitzvah lahamtedat sheyikrav Omer. It's a mitzvah to wait till the Omer is brought. Avol belav lo over. But if not, it's not going to be a transgression. Masnisan HaOmer Mater. Again, it says the Omer is Mater, Chodesh b'Medina la'ochlo. The new grain, one can eat it in the Medina, meaning outside the Beis HaMikdash, that's permitted by the Omer. Ushtei halechem shabatzeres, and the two loaves that are brought at Shavuos, Matir and Chodesh b'Mikdash, that allow the new grain to be used in the Beis HaMikdash. L'havi Menachos min HaChodesh, to bring karban minchas from the new grain. Alma, again we see ba'Omer talia milsa, it's all dependent upon the Omer, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf 68a Amud Beis.